Welcome again to ASP.NET Core MVC tutorial. In this video we will learn the first main pillar of MVC architecture, which is controller. So we will learn all the details of controller in this video. In this video we will start from what is controller, then we will see what is the role of controller, how can we add a new controller in your ASP.NET Core application, what are the action methods, how can we call a controller? The calling of controller means how can we call the control by using HTTP request. How can we pass the parameters in action methods? Once we will understand about the action method, then we will learn how can we pass the parameters in action methods. This is a major confusion in between the developers. When can we create a new controller? And at the last we will see how many controllers can we have in one application. Should we have only one controller or should we have more than one controller, and what maximum number of controllers can we have into one application. So let's start. What is controller? Controller is a special class. Controller is a special class with .cs file extension. If we are using C# for the development of ASP.NET Core application, then the extension for controller class will be CS. It means you will write the C# code into the controller class. By default, controllers reside in controllers folder. When you create a new application by using MVC template, then you will see there is a folder which is called as controllers, and inside that controllers folder you will find all the controller which we have into the application. In MVC template, controller class is inherited from controller class. Remember, we are not talking about the web API, we are talking about the MVC only. So if you are using MVC template where we are using add MVC or add controllers with views, then the controller class will be inherited from controller class. Now let's understand what is the role of a controller. Here on the left side I have a client. You can call it a browser or any other client that you are using, and here on the right side I have a server, and on this server an MVC application is working. These three boxes you can refer to model, view and controller. This one you can refer to view, this one controller, and this one as a model. When you send a request from client to the server, then first it goes to the HTTP pipeline. Once the request will pass from this HTTP pipeline, then it will hit the controller. Then inside the controller there are lots of methods. The request will go to a particular method, and then the logic of the application flow will be written over there into that method. Then that particular action method will generate the response and it will send back to the browser. So this is how the general flow of ASP.NET Core MVC application works. Now let's learn the role of controller in detail. A controller is used to group actions. All the similar actions or operations we define in one class. What are the actions? What are the operations? Suppose I'm working on an employee application. So getting the employee is one action. Adding a new employee is one action. Getting the home page of the application is one action. Getting the about page of application is one action. So these are some examples of the actions, and we generally group the similar actions into one controller. A controller is used to handle an incoming HTTP request. As I have already told you into the previous slide, that when we get a request from client to server, then it goes to the controller. You cannot hit a model or view directly, we can only hit a controller. The mapping of HTTP request is done using routing. At this point I told you two things, that we can have multiple methods inside one controller and we can call only these action methods from the browser or client. The mapping of request to the method of controller is done with the help of routing. So routing is the important feature in ASP.NET Core framework, and by using the routing feature we can map the request to a particular method of controller. Controllers can also be used to implement several types of other features, just like caching and security. Security meaning authentication and authorization. There are a lot of other features also which we can implement on the controllers. All these features we will learn into this tutorial. Now let's learn how can we create a new controller into the application. Here I am on the Visual Studio, and here I am using the same application that we have created for the bookstore application. In the previous video I created this new controllers folder, and inside this controllers folder I have created one controller which is home controller. Now let's add one more controller to this application. So to add a new controller, you can right click on this controller, choose add, and click on this controller option. Once you will click on this controller option, you will get several options. So 3 options are related to MVC and 3 options are related to web API. So if you are going to create an MVC controller, then you have to choose any one of these, or if you are going to create a controller for APIs, then you can choose any one of these templates. Since we are working with the MVC, and we will start from this empty controller, so I can use this empty controller. Second one, we have MVC controller with read write actions. Actions mean public methods. If we will use the second template, then few methods will be created for us automatically. Third one is MVC controller with views using entity framework. So at this point we do not have any knowledge about the views and entity framework, but just to tell you that if we are using this third template, then by using the entity framework, automatically all the views, all the classes will be generated for us and we will have a working application. But since this is the beginning of this tutorial, so we will add an empty controller for the learning purpose. Okay, let's choose this empty one and click on the add button. Remember guys, every controller class must have controller as a suffix. That is why over here in this window you can see only the default is highlighted. If you will make changes, then the text of default will be replaced to the new name, but you do not have to change the controller. Suppose I'm writing over here book controller. So basically I'm going to create a new book controller. Okay, you do not have to remove this controller class. Let's click on the add button. Now let's see the basic detail of this controller class. Here you can see the extension of this file is .cs. The name of the class is book controller and it is inherited from controller class. This controller class is available inside Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.MVC namespace. Let's right click on this one and go to the definition. Here you can see we have some methods related to the development of application. We have temp data, view bag, view data, on action executed, executing, partial views, view component. So inside this controller class we have several methods, and if you will focus on these methods, then these methods are required when we are working with the MVC template. It means we are using views into the application. There is one more class, controller base. Let's see the details of this controller base class as well. Now let's click on the go to definition. Here you can find the details of the HTTP request, the response, route data, model state, model binder, and basically all other things which are required in every application that you can find it over here. So in general we can say when we create a new API controller, then we do not need the views. So at that time we will not be using controller as a base class. We will be using this controller base class, and for the MVC controllers we will be using this controller class as a parent for our controller. We do not have to remove this suffix controller from the name of our custom controller. So this is how you can add a new controller into the application. Now let's see what are the action methods in a controller. All public methods of a controller class are known as action method because they are created for a specific action in the application. It means in one controller we can have several action methods, and each action method is created for a particular operation. An action method can return several types of data. Just for the learning purpose, let's remove this method so that we can create our custom methods by ourselves. At this point I assume that we know a controller class is used to group similar type of actions, and since we are talking about the book controller class, it means in this controller class we will define all the actions related to a book. What are the actions related to a book? For example, I need to get the list of all the books that we have into the application. So getting all books is an action. Adding a new book is an action. Deleting a book is an action. Editing a book or updating a book is an action. So here in this book controller, we will define all those methods or action methods which are required to perform several operations on book. So let's start one by one. Public. Suppose the return type is string. Remember guys, I'm creating a very dummy method inside this controller class. In several upcoming videos, we will modify these methods according to the real one. But for now, just for the learning purpose, I will start everything from very basic. So here you can see we have a very basic action method which is get all books. So this method is used to return all the books that we have into our application. And since we are using string as a return type, so we can return. So at this point we can say that we have created one action method inside our controller class. Now let's see how can we call an action method into the controller class. When we get a HTTP call on controller, we actually are hitting this request on a particular action method. Whenever we say that we are hitting an controller, it means we are hitting an action method of that controller. We never hit only a controller. In all the scenarios, we will hit a particular action method of a controller. Inside one controller, we will have multiple action methods, and whenever we will get a request from the client, then ultimately we will be hitting one of these action methods which we have defined into the controller class. And here is the default structure to call a particular action method. First, we will have the domain of the application. Since we are working on the local development, in our scenario, the domain will be localhost, then the port, and then the name of the controller without controller suffix, and then the name of the action method. So this is the basic structure to call a particular action method. So let's go back to the Visual Studio, and here we have one controller which is book, and we have one action method get all books. So it means if I call domain / book / get all books, then you must get this output onto the browser. Let's verify it by pressing Ctrl F5. So this message is coming from the default route, which is home index. In the home index we have defined WebGentle, that is why we are getting this message. But if we need to navigate to this get all books, then we can write book and we can type get all books and press enter. Here you can see we got the message all books, and this all books is coming from this get all books method. Here is one more point to notice, that I am using the name of the controller and action method in small characters. Remember guys, if you are writing a URL into the browser, then the capital or small letter doesn't matter. You can type any one of them. You can write all of them into the capital or all of them into the small. Just for the testing, if I write this S into capital and press enter, again I will get all books into the output. So suppose I'm again, just for the testing, this OO I'm typing in capital and press enter, then again you will see we are getting the same message. So the small character or capital character doesn't matter into the URL. We simply have to type the exact name and that's it. Now let's understand how can we pass the parameters inside these action methods. And for that I will create one more action method, which is public string get book. Suppose I want to get the details of one single book, then return book. Okay. And to get a single book from a collection of books, we need some identification so that we can figure out which book we need to get from that collection. And to identify that book or to filter that book, we need some parameter. Suppose I need an ID. Suppose I have 5 books into the database, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I need the details of a book with ID 4 or 3 or 2. So I cannot create multiple action methods for each ID. We can simply create action method as a generic action method, and here we can pass the ID. So this action method will work for all the IDs that we will have into the database. It will work for 1, 2, 3, 4, and these 1, 2, 3, 4, the details of ID we will get from the client. How? Let's learn how. To understand it into the better way, first let's open this startup class. Inside this startup class, we have already used this method, which is map default controller route. If I right click on this one and go to the definition, let's open the details of this method also. Here is the pattern that we have defined for the default route. First, we have to pass controller. If we are not passing the name of controller, then by default it will be home. Then after the name of controller, we have to pass the name of action method. If we are not passing the name of action method, then by default it will be index. So suppose inside my book controller, I have one action method which is called index, and into the URL I am only typing book. So by default it will hit the index method of the book controller. Why? Because index is written over here If you will not define the name, then by default these will be the names, and as a third parameter I can pass the ID. If I pass the third parameter into the URL, then it will be ID. If I do not pass, then there will be no error. Now let's go back to the controller. Here you can say we have the book controller, we have the action method book, and now this time we will be passing the ID. Let's learn how. And now let's return this ID also. Okay. Now let's press Ctrl F5. So remember, the default URL of the application is home index. Every time you will run your application, it will hit the index action method of home controller until you will define a new URL here in this browser. To get the details of all books, we can simply type book and get all books. So using this we can get the details of all books, and now we have to get the details of one single book. So first we have to define the name of controller, which is book, and second is get book. So this is the name of action method, then slash and ID. So suppose 1, and if I press enter over here, then you can see we are getting output book with ID equal to 1. If I type 2 over here and press enter, then you will see I am getting the details of book 2. Don't focus on the details, just focus on the concept. So we are creating only one action method for all the books. To get the detail of all the books, we will be using only this single action method. We do not have to create an action method for each book. We can simply fetch the data of all books by using only one action method. This get book action method is used to get the detail of a particular book. And we can use this getBook method only in one scenario where we know the exact ID of that particular book. But suppose if I want to search the book, for that let's make a new action method. So public string. Don't focus on the return type of these methods. We will learn all these things in upcoming videos. For now, just focus on the concepts about the action method and controller. Search. Suppose I want to search the book based on the name, book name. Also I can search this book based on the author name. Okay, let's return the data. Now in this scenario we have two parameters. First one is book name, second one is author name. And since we have defined only ID into the default route, then how can we pass multiple parameters into this action method? For that, let's run the application. Here is the default route. Now we have to go to the search books action method, and first you have to type the name of the controller, which is book. Then we have to type search books, and now we have to type the book name and the author name. How can we do that? And if we do not have ID, then we will use query string to pass the data from this URL to this action method. And how can we use the query string? First you have to use question mark, then you have to type the name of your query. In our scenario, the first query or first parameter is book name, so we will write book name equal. To define the value we have to use equal sign and then the name of the book. Suppose I'm writing over here MVC book. So this is how we can define one parameter, and you have to use question mark only for the first time. If you need to define one more parameter, then you can use ampersand, and then you have to define the name of your second parameter, which is author name. Then you have to type the name of your author, which is, suppose it is Nitish. Okay, and let's press enter. Here you can see we got the output. Okay, oh, so there is a type of mistake, boom, that is why we are getting this word over here. With name, let's focus on the output. The name of the book is MVC book and author is Nitish. Let's put the breakpoint over here and let's refresh this page. So you can see we got the request here in this search books, and inside the book name we have the name of the book, which is MVC book, and in the second parameter author name we have the name of the author. This is how we can get the details of both the parameters. So first parameter we have book name, then the author name, and we can modify the output as per the need of the application. Here just for the learning purpose I am writing back to the output so that we can identify the exact output. But in the general scenario, based on these parameters, we will get the data from the database or some other resource, and we will display it on the UI. Let's continue. If we will change the name of the book, suppose instead of using MVC book, I'm typing here Java and press enter, then in this case you can see the name of the book is Java and the author name is Nitish. Let's press continue, and here you can see we got the output Java book and author is Nitish. So this is how you can pass the parameters to your action methods. When should we create a new controller? Whenever we need to define a new group of operations into application. So suppose earlier we were having home controller into this application, and for the home controller we can define several actions just like the home page, the about page, contact page. All the basic details about this application we can write into home controller. But now we have to develop something related to the book. So all the operations related to book we will define into book controller. Let's take one more example. Suppose I need to implement the security, login, logout, change password, forgot password, all these things. For all those related operations, we can create one account controller or membership controller. You can give any meaningful name, and we can create all those action methods into that new controller. Ultimately, the result is whenever we need to define new group of operations, or we can say whenever we need to define similar operations, then we can create one new controller. Now the question is, how many controllers can we have into one application? Depends on the application. If you are developing a large scale application, then that application might have n number of controllers. At least one controller is required to perform operations. Since all the HTTP request comes to controller action method, it means we need at least one controller inside the application to work in the MVC pattern. Maximum n number of controllers we can have into one application. So basically it all depends on the requirement of your application. If you have to work on loads of operations into your application, then you can create n number of controllers. You can define all the operations into one controller as well, but that might not be a good architecture. To create a good architecture for your application, you have to divide your application into small groups, and for each small group you can create one controller. So never ever use only one controller inside your application. Based on the requirement or operations or group of operations, you have to create or you must create a new controller. That is all in this video. I hope after watching this video you will be able to understand the controller into detail. In the next video we will understand about the models into ASP.NET Core. Till then, thank you for watching. Have a great day.